you, Adrian. That was a rich array of new terminologies and new arguments, etc. And
can you put the last slide?
It's a very fine suggestion. So, Juhana, I wonder how you would put your own thoughts on this matter.
Well, yes. Let me react. Thank you. Let me react to something that you said. At times, during the course of your argument, I felt at times a bit lost, but then this last slide, in fact, my view is that this gets us forward. Since your sort of material analysis of the situation does not really challenge my basic dilemma, but what you seem to suggest in this is that do not rely on this idea that is very sort of dear to economists, that we really start from zero virtue inputs. That's what we do in our economic models. We assume that these economic agents will start to maximize their own leisure and income, and they don't have any commitment to society at all. And then this analysis leads us to policy recommendations that mostly rely, indeed, on the profit motive, right? So that what we say is that, well, if the labor input is not large enough to sustain the welfare state, then we must cut unemployment benefits and cut taxes on labor income, and by these means working becoming more attractive, then the labor input will increase. And what you suggest, in fact, is something that in fact I find extremely convincing, is that the good politician here should not talk speak so much about economic incentives, but community values, virtues, responsibilities of the citizen, etc. And in some way, when you put this list up there, then I would say this reminds me of what goes on in Sweden. I mean, even and Sweden does not have a sustainability problem, and even the right-wing bourgeois Minister of Finance, Anders Borg, who I must confess I feel much I'm a sort of secret admirer of his. But this is more or less what he says. He does not talk so much about economic incentives, but he talks about this our common society based on Nordic values and Lutheran values of working. And my values, that's something that he said, my values do not differ from those of the Social Democrats, but the difference is that I take this work ethic and work idea seriously, whereas they mostly speak about subsidies and transfers. And somehow that seems to work to some extent in Sweden, in my view, so that this appeal to the virtue and the work ethic does a lot of the job that we economists would assume should be done by economic incentives. But in fact, there is a deficit on virtue in many of these issues. So I think this last slide really takes us forward. But the problem with our country, Finland, is that the political talk about these issues and the way politicians address these issues do not really appeal to this to a large enough degree. I guess there's more talk in this country, more talk of how we all are victimized by the global economy and market forces and our jobs that move to China, or how the work life is much too stressful and takes a tear and toll on individual workers, and we cannot work until the retirement age. There's much less talk in this country of the common virtue of working and sustaining our welfare arrangements. And I can now, when my reflection on what you said is the sort of the deep reflection is the following. I guess that when we economists, we put the profit motive first, and we mostly talk about economic incentives, that may in fact alienate some people, some workers who don't like to be addressed as profit seekers or economic maximizers, according to what we economists think of them. And there is a very nice paper, in fact, on this that might be used in this argument in an indirect way. It's by a brilliant Norwegian economist who's professor at the Stockholm School of Economics. Tore Ellingsen is his name. And he has a couple of years back, he has a very nice paper on when economic incentives can become counterproductive. So it's a very sort of standard economic setup where there is a principal and an agent. And the principal sets economic incentives for the agent in order to make him carry out some tasks. And then he builds a sort of philosophical argument where, in the case where the economic incentives are very sharp, then the agent starts to think that the principal is only a profit-driven, unethical person, and then he doesn't really want to work at all, and or do precisely what the principal would like him to do. And to put, I guess many of in the audience here are not familiar with these principal-agent models, but I might, if I would put this in more intuitive terms, if I again refer to this example of how things work in the family. Let's say in our family, we have persuaded our son to do some grocery every day for us. Let's say he buys 2 liters of milk. We drink a lot of milk, so he buys 2 liters of milk every day. And then, well, we get older, and someday I will tell to him that, well, we would now like you to, this is completely imaginary, of course, we would like you to buy not only milk, but even bread and vegetables. And then he would say, well, I have a life of my own, you know, I would like to play my guitar and see my friends and see my girlfriend. I don't really want to put up this or that labor input for this family. And then if I would say, like an economist, well, so far I have not paid you anything for buying these groceries. What if I now pay you 10 euros and you buy some more, you buy even the vegetables and the bread? And then his reaction might be, well, now I see that you seem to insult me by suggesting that I have been doing this, I would be doing this for economic incentives. In fact, of course, I've been buying the milk because I love you as my parents. But the fact that you put such an economic incentive on me, that means that you don't really appreciate me as a sort of whole human being. And perhaps I might now buy some vegetables and bread for you, but now I want you to pay 50 euros for me, since I will now, from now on, look at this as a purely economic transaction. This is more or less the Ellingsen argument put in more intuitive terms. You understand the basic setup. And this is perhaps at least a kind of intermediate answer, that we should really put this problem in terms of moral, social commitments, group responsibilities. We should not promote these policies on virtue parsimonious grounds, and we should not regard the profit motive as a singular motive. Instead, we should speak about responsibilities and rights. But then, of course, you have the harsh real world. When you want really to deal with this, you should get the politicians talk about this, and not only about economic incentives. And then there's the very harsh economic reality that in order to design sustainable public finances, we need anyway a large inflow of immigrants. And it might be the case for many immigrant groups, for example, that when they come in the country, they do not really share all these age-old values, perhaps, and so, I mean, many Danish social scientists say that it was in fact the immigrants that really compelled the authorities to design these more profit-oriented labor market policies. This is not, I'm not saying that immigrants in some ways are lazy or whatever, but they certainly, a newcomer in a country does not immediately share the same ethical heritage and common ground in that sense. And so we will have heterogeneous groups reacting on these incentives. You might say the suspicion of many older workers is that the young do not really share their work ethic either. They just take whatever transfers there are to take, and they don't feel the same group responsibilities as the older generations do. And then you have immigrants. So it's a sort of heterogeneous group of preferences that you are addressing people with these policies. But basically, I think this is a very nice intermediate answer, at least. So that would be my reaction to what Adrian said.
Yeah, thank you. Sounds like a striking agreement is emerging. By the way, of course, in economics there are new initiatives that introduce exactly these sorts of ideas, considerations of moral emotions, fairness, trust, group identity, and all that. But I think Finnish economics and also Swedish economics are weak on this. So I mean, maybe the Nordic countries require different kind of academic economics in the near future before it's too late. But let's open the floor for you. Sure, you have questions, reactions, queries. We have Aki and then Marion.
Well, I was thinking for a long time that you talk about this fiscal sustainability issue. And I was thinking if there are differences between Finland and Sweden, for example, with respect to this issue, there's two causes. One is that they have taken in much more immigrants, and the second is, of course, the wartime differences that we have the big generations retiring now. But my intuition has been all the time, why couldn't it solve the problem just by increasing the immigration?
You want me to
Yeah, that's good.
if I start, well, technically, sort of from the point of view of technocratic economics, that would I mean, designing a somewhat selfish immigration policy in the sort of as a country like Canada does, taking an influx of immigrants with such a composition that the overall rate of employment will just be large enough that would solve the problem. But this is part of this political dilemma, that this solution seems to be rejected by the political system. And there is a very concrete, sharp difference in this respect between Sweden and Finland, in as much as Finland still operates a selective immigration policy where the recruitment of, when firms recruit from outside the European community, then this will be subject to an assessment of whether there is a shortage of labor in that sector. And very often this is a longish bureaucratic procedure that results in less immigration. So, and in many ways, the decision makers reject this solution. The knee-jerk reaction is to say, well, we must first give jobs to our own unemployed, and then we will start importing people. But then, as economists, we know that this will never happen, since the very fact that we have a shrinking labor force does not per se affect the structural rate of unemployment. So we might never come in that phase where we have given jobs to our own unemployed and then start increasing immigration. But basically the answer is yes. You only have to convince the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance on that.
Mary.
Yeah, so I had two thoughts. One was within the framework of your solution, well, actually more of what Adrian was discussing in terms of pensions, of what you think of a proposal of, this was just inspired when you were talking about distributive burdens. So about pensions being more individualized in comparison to how much input you've actually put into the labor force. So depending on how early you start employment. In this case, academics are tough luck because it takes such a long time for us to get out into the labor market. But as you were pointing out, a lot of us don't mind working later, whereas people that don't engage in higher education might be cut slack and get be allowed to have pensions earlier, and that would be a kind of good way of incentivizing work as well as minimizing the felt burden of.
Okay, it's your suggestion that those who are working more menial work have an earlier
So it's not really determined about the content of your work as much as how long you actually participate in the labor market.
I think, I think you can have differential, depending on what it means, but as long, I'd be pretty wary of punishing, I suppose I'm a little bit wary of us in a privileged situation punishing those who come from less privileged backgrounds, but it just depends what it meant. But yeah, I don't have a problem with it at all. If you could have differential retirement ages, that's what you're suggesting. Yeah, okay, yeah, I don't know.
Well, that's certainly an issue on the table, but then it also endangers it implies a kind of sunk cost in as much as if you impose a sort of amount of years worked as a condition for retirement, then some people who might still want to go on working just will retire earlier than they would otherwise do. If you start working at 20 and you have put the limit at 60, then the person at 40 years of career, then the person retires at 60, even if we by other means could have convinced him or her to work until 68 and contribute to the public purse. So this is certainly, it's an issue on the table, but it entails some costs, some inefficiency as well.
So can I just ask the other thing was another solution, kind of outside your framework of discussion, like ACI, but it was different. Proposal. I was thinking there was very little talk about sort of why there's a problem now with the Nordic model, why it's suddenly in tension. It strikes me that one of the problems is global competition and businesses demanding, stakeholders of businesses, owners of business demanding, very easily saying we're moving abroad or demanding more profit margins. So in terms of getting more people into work, it should also be about job creation, not just incentivizing work, because it seems like, to me, not the work ethic isn't the main problem. The problem is more to do with, diminishing types of opportunity on a national basis for at least some types of work. So I was kind of surprised that you didn't address that.
Well, that's really an issue on the material side. What's your analysis of the economy? And economists certainly disagree on that. I completely disagree with that description, since we are a part of a global capital market, so that in my analysis the employment rate in the long run is completely determined by labor supply. But this is, some economists would agree with you, I guess. Still, I would guess the majority would agree with me.
There's an argument for it.
What about you, Adrian?
I don't know about the empirical side of it. Part of the point I was making at the end there is that the pressure shouldn't just be on the working on business as well. So I suppose part of, and I don't know how that translates into the empirical considerations you've got here. I don't actually know what the causes are. Insofar as, in that report, it actually talks about globalisation that you wrote as one of the causes, not just a demographic. So, I think that is part of the story, obviously. But I do think that the pressure one thing that worries me about a lot of these sorts of projects is that there's excessive focuses on the commitment of the workers and not enough perhaps on the businesses. Is that what you're suggesting? Yeah, well, that was in a sense what I was saying at the end there too. I'm not going to disagree with Juhana about the empirical matter.
No, business has no, what was Marx? What's this in English? Business has no fatherland or whatever. It's just an amorphous, globalized capital. They don't have any commitments towards whichever particular country, and they will never have. So I think that's just empty talk.
Yeah, thanks. This is a follow-up to Aki's point, and then another question to your, just a follow-up comment on the, if there's a good economic argument for raising the level of immigration significantly, I think it's the role of those experts who don't have a stake in the political party, who don't have to be elected, that they should make a lot of noise about that, especially in the current opinion climate in Finland. So I think that's, we should put that back on the agenda. I think that it was on the agenda earlier, but recent political turns have sort of taken it quietly away from the agenda. So just a comment. Then on the suggestion on, I think that this kind of move that you appeal to the sense of responsibility, I think that goes well with the kind of Nordic welfare model idea. But I think that what it, as it's sort of the other side of the coin, is that then it presupposes that people feel that their kind of sense of fairness or the sense of justice in how the cuts are being made or how the burdens are being reallocated, that works. So that if there's a growing sense of injustice and then there's also growing allocation of burdens, then it doesn't work. So it seems that as often is the key to keep the kind of sense of solidarity going. That the perception of justice, and it might be that because if the system is already brilliant and then it's sort of deteriorating a little, it might lead to a growing sense of injustice, even though sort of it's a brilliantly just system still. So it's this kind of.
This is just anecdotal, but from my reading of it, what's going on in Greece is that people believe the whole system is corrupt. Just average people, everyone else is ripping off. Government's ripping money off, big business is ripping money off. Why shouldn't I? And it's what you're talking about there, is a growing sense of injustice, and then kind of commitment to the social whole disappears. And I think that's the kind of concern you have, isn't it? So part of the story has to be that there's a perception that the way that if there's a burden, that it is being shared in a fair way, even if it's not equally, but nonetheless that the burden that is there is being shared in a way that people regard as just. So I agree with you, and that's kind of part of what I was alluding to.
I guess this is an issue that these Nordic governments in some way are aware of, and an example of that is the fact that there is in place, even in Sweden, a higher tax bracket for those who earn a very high monthly income, over 60,000 crowns or something like that. That was established in the late 90s, if I remember. It's called Värnskatten, a kind of tax for the rich. And the econometrics tell us that this does not really bring in revenue. I mean, the high income people are able to transfer that income into capital income or whatever. But the Swedish government still does not want to abolish that tax, I guess, and that's precisely because of what you say. They want to give all these signals of fairness at the same time when they impose a sort of fairly harsh labor market supply boosting policy. But I completely agree, and perhaps the problem with the dilemma of these 2010s years is that there are so many phenomena that all push into a sort of less unequal, less equitable distribution. Many of these technological innovations, for example, they tend to increase low-paying jobs and high-paying jobs, and many people see the entire system moving into a more unfair direction. And then, of course, there would be opposition towards activating labor market policy as well.
Can I just say something following on from that? Because it's interesting. What you're picking up there is the expressive function of some of these, measures. So the measure in Sweden that you're talking about clearly has an expressive function. There was a guy called Bernard de Juvenal in I think it was in the 50s wrote a book on justice, and he's a very right-wing economist. He was saying, look, if you tax and redistribute from the top, it has very little overall benefit. But of course, and it's presumably that's what you're saying here. But sometimes it has an expressive function in terms of maintaining a sense of justice across society that then maintains a social commitment, which in the long run presumably has utilitarian benefits.
Let me just, as a side remark, remind you of our preparatory conversations when we tried to find a focus for this discussion. Juhana insisted on this structural problem, and you said it's completely independent of the current crisis. And I suggested that maybe it is, but the solution of the structural problem is not independent of the current crisis, especially how the current crisis is being treated. If there is this feeling and sense of unfairness, injustice, etc., the way that the European debt crisis is being dealt with in favor of big banks, using our taxpayers' money and all that, the increasing income differences and all that. If there is this growing sense of injustice in society, then it's going to be a big problem for solving the structural problem. And therefore, you need to, politicians should take good care of the moral sentiments in society at large.
Yeah, that's a nice point.
Okay, we have Lisa.
Yes, I'm sorry that we came a bit late and I missed the first part, but the distributive burden, if I understood, is mostly financially. But what about environmental aspects? Because all paid jobs are not environmentally useful or beneficial, and the new discussion on welfare states and the futures of the welfare states are also looking at the issue of environmental costs of kind of work.
Yeah, well, I suppose it just adds another complication to it, doesn't it? We're treating it here without thinking about them. Look, the questions as they're phrased here don't take into account environmental considerations. Clearly, those need to be taken into account, but whether they make any difference in terms of the way that we distribute goods amongst ourselves is another matter. They might well mean that that there's less. We have to cut back certain ways we produce goods, but I don't know whether it makes any difference within the distributive questions, within a society. It may well be change the way that we do create wealth. Does that make sense? Yep, maybe. I don't know if you want to say something about that.
Well, yeah, in my view, it opens up one more layer of sort of dilemmas with the vis-a-vis the economic model and the virtue parsimonious model. Here, the main externality is the labor input. It's for purely economic agents in the Nordic society. It is attractive to work quite a little since our leisure is subsidized by the welfare state. And then our preliminary conclusion at least seems to be that we must appeal to group responsibility and not virtue parsimoniousness. But then this environmental issue just replicates a kind of similar issue on the global level. And this is far too grandiose for me. I don't know anything about that other issue.
Yes, since we are in the interdisciplinary approach now, I'd like to elaborate this a little, because we were talking all the time as if there existed only economics on the other hand and philosophy on the other hand, whereas the questions of welfare have usually been addressed within the disciplines of social policy, which deal with or explain the social policy or the welfare system, usually based on agencies, interest, power, and so forth. And they don't figure in your argumentation by any means. This is my first question. The second question concerns the sociology or the understanding of labor. how you understand the working life, because if you take the working life in terms of the sociology of work, you will always find there as well, not only let's say, equal relations, but high level inequality. When you were saying, Andrew, that you would be willing to work as we all would like to, it's not a problem for us to work until 68 or whatever, because we like it. It's not organized, it's not heteronomic in that sense. But for most of the people, this is the problem, and this is the problem for the Social Democrats in political terms, because they represent people who do not have this kind of position in the working class. How do you address this issue?
But the second question, I did assume it was, my point was not to generalise from my own experience, but more to recognise that it was a harm. So the assumption was that this is a burden, and then, that's how I addressed it, in a sense. First question is about, I don't know, did you want to say anything about that?
Well, I might just, on the second issue. Well, of course, there is gross inequality in the labour market, and some people have menial jobs and some have very satisfying jobs. But my question to you is, well, we have this practical problem with the fiscal sustainability. How would you address this work-life inequality? I just can't see any easy solutions. I am still fairly convinced that this economic openness and participation with the global economy and using the global division of labor, this gives us on average the sort of a high living standard. And I'm quite sort of honest and candid in admitting that I don't have any sort of solution to that basic problem, short of the in excess of what social democracy traditionally has promised. Tax in some of the incomes and then try to publicly provide some goods that enhance the quality of life for everybody. But sort of a kind of social revolution, I don't know how you should address this. How would you address that? I guess it was tried in 1918, but it did not turn out that well either.
Quick summary of this.
In social democratic tradition, which you know as well as I do, there has been different kind of efforts to democratize the working life. And there is a huge problem concerning the inequality of organizing how the work should be organized and so forth. And even Robert A. Dahl, the most prominent American theorist of democracy, argued in the end of his life that this kind of democracy is still in need. And this is something that the social democrats has usually not addressed, because these are very substantive, complicated issues. They are cultural issues, but they are also political issues concerning the working life. In very substantive terms, in very real terms. But the problem with the traditional Marxist approach was that they said that everybody is exploited in every factory in the same way, which doesn't make much sense. But that if you take into account the power relations in more concrete terms, the problem is still there.
Sure, but then, you might say democratize working life, and that might work in a closed society or closed economy, or if you do it globally. But we have to work with this globalized capital without any fatherland. And if you democratize, then if that does affect the cost of labor in country A, then capital will withdraw from country A and invest in country B with less democratized labor life. That's the basic, in my view, that's the description of global capitalism that we have to live in.
But you have to remember that also the labor used to be internationally organized. And if you look at the international comparisons at this point, how weak is trade unions, for example, there has been a huge decline since 1975 in terms of the organization rate. But this is not inevitable. it's also about resources, it's also about the target, it's also about the need is huge because the people who work in China or in Africa in the factories, they really are exploited in real terms.
That's right, but unionization increases fast in China, you know. So let's hope for the better.
Before having the final question, let me remind you of Markus' first question. I mean, how come you forgot the notions of power and interest? I mean, are they relevant at all? Or is it because of your disciplinary backgrounds that you don't recognize these concepts?
Well, we can't talk about everything. Is that reasonable? I don't know. I mean, it's you know, I'm interested in. I mean, I can't talk for Juhana, but I'm interested in questions of principles that might underpin and should promote, or we should be promoting. I mean, I think power and interest are important, but I'm not sure that, you know, in a sense. I mean, if you get a story, I mean, one way you might have some sort of sociological objection that we can't say what we say without acknowledging kind of the, you know, the social origins of certain kinds of ideas or something like that. I mean, do you have an objection to a sociological objection, if you want, to being able to speak about these principles without acknowledging the social background of them or something? Because you might actually think, I mean, one way, sometimes you might actually think that sort of philosophical things with economics, but you might actually think that the philosopher's way of talking about this treats ideas as if they exist in some conceptual netherworld, and that I'm not we're not taking seriously enough the sort of contingent features that shape them. Is that what you're saying? Or?
They are not contingent features, but they might be quite systematic, and we have a huge industry of systematic knowledge on these issues concerning welfare structures and this kind of things.
Systematic what?
Systematic industrial research, even on welfare. It's not kind of accidental fact. It's a systematic knowledge.
Sure. In my world, everything should anyway boil down to tax and transfer and social insurance parameters. And then, of course, I'm a fairly conventional economist. So. Yes.
Okay, this is very enjoyable. Very last question.
Answering to your question, Adrian sort of said that we should consider the distribution of things on more broader. So could we just consider that our lifetime expectancy has raised on certain groups and certain groups it hasn't. So it would be fair for us to work to the longer age and then somehow benefit those who are not members of that group on other ways, for example, taxation ways, or people who are earning less or working many hours but still earning quite little, so paying for them on taxation and still raising the age of.
I mean, just personally, I've always thought, years ago, years ago, I wrote a little bit on this, but I was interested in meaningful work as a distributive good or a distributive benefit. And I do think that there is actually a benefit that's often not acknowledged to people like us who work in what you might call meaningful work, I mean, however you define that. And I think that needs to be taken into account when you're looking at the justice of a set of social arrangements. So I think that's in agreement with what you're saying, that a distributive meaningful work is rarely ever thought about as one of the distributive benefits that's allocated within a social system, and I think it should be. So, and that's sort of a part of what was, you know, with, yeah, so it's true.
Basically, yes, but then in practical political terms, it's quite hard to design pension systems that incorporate a lot of redistribution. The additional challenge there is that you have to design these policies by using observable, identifiable characteristics of groups of people. For example, if you design a pension system where some people who have according to some group mean, have a lower life expectancy, then of course it would be attractive for whichever person to say, well, I belong to that group. And how will you design the test that discriminates between these different groups? For practical social policy and pension policy, these are extremely difficult issues. But basically, you're right.
Okay, I think it's time to bring this to an end. I want to thank our two speakers very much indeed. This was very, very instructive and enlightening. And my anticipation is that the next step is that Juhana will invite Adrian to his group of advisors.
Yeah. Thank you very much.